Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for this EDU webinar. We're glad to have you. Looks like we've got a few more joining here. We'll get started shortly and have a bit of an introduction, but we say thank you to all of you who joined us and hope you're having a great day so far, wherever you are. We're really glad to have you. My name is John McBride. I'm happy to help us get started today for today's webinar, and then I'm just going to briefly introduce our guests, and then we'll turn things over to them for the remainder of today's discussion. But again, we're glad you're here for this EDU webinar. So first of all, let me introduce John Richards. He's a developer advocate at Pantheon and lives in St. Louis with his wife and clouder of cats. His love for coding stems from his enjoyment in innovating simple solutions for complex challenges. John has been a web developer since 2007 and fell in love with open source in 2013 when he took a job developing WordPress sites at Washington University in St. Louis. You'll see that both of our guests today have higher ed backgrounds, so we're glad to have them with us. Chaney Kourounoitis is a senior solutions consultant at FFW. Before becoming a consultant, she served as a communications lead at UC Berkeley School of Law. She was also assistant director of communications at Stanford, Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, and she's also served as director of marketing and customer experience at Rick Steves Europe. So we're glad to have both of them with us, and with that, we'll hand things over here. One other point to make is that John and Chaney have reserved some time to answer your questions at the end of the presentation today. As we go throughout the presentation, you're welcome to use the chat feature to put your questions in there. You can either save your questions for the end or just put them in there as we go, and John and Chaney will monitor that. But please use that chat feature, and we'd love to get your questions there. So with that, thanks again for joining us. I think I've said that like 8 or 9 times, but we understand how busy you are and how many webinars have popped up during these COVID times. So we're glad that you chose to join us today. So with that, John and Chaney, we'll hand things over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. I will go ahead and get us started. So welcome everybody to how WebOps moves your mission forward. So we are going to be talking a little bit today about the relationship of web operations to your ultimate institutional mission, right? And we know we're preaching to the choir a little bit here. If you've taken the time to join us on this webinar today, we don't need to convince you that WebOps is important to how you do your work and how you support your institution. But a couple things we're going to be focusing on that we think will be of great use to you are some concrete steps for how to move forward from wherever you are in your WebOps journey, and some ways of discussing this with your colleagues in leadership that might help get people on board. So as we know, building consensus is really important when you are trying to make changes, especially at a university. And so we both have had some experience with that, and we have some strategies to share with you today that we hope will be of value. So we already had a great introduction from John, so I won't linger too long on this, but as he said, we are both veterans of the higher ed technology world. So I'm a senior solutions consultant at FFW with past experience at both Stanford and UC Berkeley, working in marketing, communications, and communications technology. John, do you want to take a second to say hello before we jump in?
Yeah, hello everyone. Please feel free to throw your questions in the chat. I know we've said that, but we'd love to engage with you wherever you're at. I'm John Richards. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon, where I specialize in training teams on implementing website operation best practices. Before this, as John mentioned, I spent 7 years at WashU, where I started as a web developer and kind of ended as the senior director of digital communications. So I've had the fortunate chance to kind of see things from a lot of different perspectives, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of those experiences and you can learn from that process today.
Great, thank you so much, John. So in true classroom fashion, we'll start with a little bit of an interactive exercise. So we did talk about you guys putting questions in chat, but we also would love to hear a little bit from you about your own experiences. So just give a quick thought to the number one thing that you wish your site did right now, but it doesn't. And if the chat function is working for you, go ahead and drop that in chat. I can certainly think of a few for myself, just based on my own previous experience working in higher ed, marketing and technology, right? I often wished, for example, that I could enable content updates in less than half an hour or more. That was often a glorious dream that I had for some of the sites that I've worked with. I remember going through a period where I really struggled to filter and sort faculty publications in a way that made sense both to my faculty and to my users. That was a big blocker for one of the sites that I worked on. I often wish that I might be able to support content customization without throwing my branding completely out the window. Sometimes it was just as simple as, gosh, I wish my site would stay up reliably and not crash. That would be great. So we definitely have all felt some of those types of pain points with our sites as we go through. I don't see anything in the chat myself, John or John. I don't know if any of that is coming through for you or if we want to just hop right along.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we could see those, so we may need to have those shared, because I can only post to organizers and panelists. So.
Got it. Okay. Well, folks, they're welcome to, again, sort of share your thoughts and experiences as you go. If something strikes you, I know from my experience working in higher ed technology, the experiences and wisdom of my colleagues was often one of the most important tools I had in my toolbox. So although you'll hear from us today about some of our own past experiences, you also have a lot to share with each other. So the chat function is a great way for you also to connect with each other and talk a little bit about what you've been through in the world of WebOps in higher ed. So when you're thinking about your own site, what it does, and more importantly, more salient for you right now, what it doesn't do, this is already kind of a painful subject for IT teams, right? In most organizations, you're going to be under-resourced, you're going to be a little bit overwhelmed, and you're really starting to see some interference in how you're working to actually support your educational or scholarly mission, because you're having to deal with things like tedious, repetitive copy updates, unreliable site crashing, you have a difficulty maybe communicating with your larger constituency. All of these things are getting in the way of what you signed up to do when you signed up to work at a university, which is to support its institutional mission. So really, our goal here is trying to think about how to make the explicit connection between what your website can and should be doing for you, what it isn't right now, how that impacts what you're trying to do in your mission, and how to get past that so we can actually get to the task at hand. Before we do all that, of course, perhaps you might be able to think of just one thing that may have exacerbated this situation slightly in the past year, a time when suddenly your site needed to be perhaps more or functional than ever before, or doing different things. Perhaps it needed to support remote learning all of a sudden, or you needed to be able to provide real-time updates to your community right at the same time when suddenly your staff can't go into their office and your resources perhaps are cut significantly. So obviously we've all had a lot of pretty painful experiences from the last year, both about what a website can and should be doing for us and where the existing resource website might be falling a little bit short and how that impacts how you're trying to do your work, right? So this year has really been a very clear-cut object lesson for many of us in what happens when you under-resource your communications infrastructure. Oh, I did see one item from the chat came in. One of our participants wants more robust faculty and employee pages that are optimized for search and help establish them as experts in their fields, right? And that's so important. Certainly when I was working at a research institute, our primary driver of traffic was people searching for the names of our most prominent scholars, right? And that was the entry point to our site for everything else we wanted to share with our users. And so those kinds of problems are common. They can be difficult to manage because, of course, dealing with a bio site for faculty means suddenly you're dealing with what are your university templates? How do we optimize this? How do I push forward and make this work? Are they even legible? You know, there's a lot going on in there. So yeah, that's a really good, really common problem and one to really sink our teeth into when we're thinking about what the site needs to do for us and how it needs to support our mission. So let's talk a little bit about what these problems are in more detail before we break down exactly how that we need to solve them. So to clarify, when we talk about WebOps, we're not necessarily talking about a department or a person or a particular software product. WebOps is really the set of practices that allow you to collaborate with all the different stakeholders who have a say in what goes on the web, in order to make it as easy as possible for the website to support you rather than the other way around, right? The website should be a tool in your toolkit that enables you to move your mission forward. It should not be a chain around your ankles dragging you down and keeping you from getting the other work done that you want to get done. So when we talk about web operations today, you'll see us talk about technology for sure, but also about governance, about process, about collaboration, and all the things that you can do to really make this tool work for you in a way that is helpful to you, to your users, to your community, and really makes it an asset and not something that you have to sort of power through dealing with. So again, we're preaching to the choir here, right? You guys probably are all intimately familiar with the ways in which your website supports or should support your university mission. Sometimes that can be a difficult argument to make to colleagues, stakeholders, and leadership. Not everybody understands the close relationship that the two of them have. And there are some specific reasons, especially this year, why you might want to make the argument to your leadership that investing in WebOps is particularly key for your institution right now. The first one, of course, is reliable crisis response, right? Again, we have all learned in painful way this year, under-resourced communication systems are not sufficient in a time of unexpected crisis. And the institutions that come out of this crisis are not going to be forgiven for making that mistake again. You need to have a system that can respond to all kinds of crazy going on at your institution. And we've seen firsthand what happens when that's not there for you. So that's key. That's going to be a powerful argument for just about anyone who's had to deal with, members of your constituency or the public over the past year as you've tried to explain and help your institution respond to COVID-19, right? So another reason why this is particularly important now is this ongoing trend towards doing everything digital. Obviously, this was a big trend before COVID, and COVID certainly accelerated it to a great degree, right? Suddenly, now everything's happening remotely, everything's happening digitally. And of course, we hope in the near future, some things like classroom instruction and scholarly collaboration are going to go back to being face-to-face, right? We miss people, I miss people. But some of these trends are not going to go away. In a lot of ways, your constituents, your students, perhaps even your faculty, your parents, your alumni, have started to get accustomed to the convenience of being able to go to a website and get the information they need right at their fingertips and not have to, go on campus to get what they need or talk to a human on the phone, right? That trend isn't going to go away. Some of these conveniences are really, people are coming to expect them now. And so that's going to be something you're going to have to continue to provide going forward. And then the third reason we put forward here, there are not a lot of audiences where I can talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to web development, but we figured this is definitely an audience that would probably respond to that, right? So when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, you have to meet your most basic fundamental needs before you can meet your higher level, more aspirational needs, right? The website version of food and shelter is it stays up and doesn't crash every day. And in order to use your site for the stuff they talk about in the view book, it has to be stable, it has to be reliable, it has to be fully functional so that your staff isn't spending all of their time putting out fires or wasting all of their time doing the same copy update tasks every day, when what you really want them to do is be supporting your institution and driving impact. So there are a lot of specific and concrete ways that your site might be supporting your institution, that might be driving impact if it's working properly, right? And depending on whether you're at your central university communications or marketing office, or whether you are at a school or an institution, or you're at an educationally adjacent institution, there are a variety of different things that are that you can draw a very specific bright line between the type of things that you might do with your site and the type of activity that is needed to support your institution, right? Whether that is responding quickly to crisis situations, whether it's integrating with social media so that students and prospective students can communicate with you in the way that they want to, whether it's supporting donations and giving, obviously pretty key part of keeping a university going, connecting students with faculty and with each other or with alumni, you know, depending on your situation, there are so many different things that a fully functioning site can and should be doing in order to move your institution forward. So when we think about a site that drives impact, we go from the specifics that I just showed. It's sort of kind of ladders up into these different categories, right? So some combination of these things your site needs to do to be impactful, right? You need to be supporting your educational mission. You need to be supporting and sharing the research that your faculty are carrying out. You need to be able to provide information about the school to prospective students, parents, donors, other people who are interested. You need to enable engagement with all of your constituencies in a variety of different ways under a variety of different circumstances. And you need to be able to facilitate giving. Again, there's that important bottom line that keeps the doors open. So a site that drives impact is going to do some combination of these things or support all of these things in a really concrete way. Unfortunately, a lot of us are not quite up to the impact level of the pyramid in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? A lot of us are stuck a little bit further down, trying to think about, if I make this change to content, is the site going to break? Or why does it take a day and a half to put this new piece of content up? Like, why is this taking so long? Can I replace content without completely changing the branding of the institution? You know, all of these things. We're still dealing with some basic functionality, right? That's very common. It is, if it's a problem for you, it's not just you. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we might get past that and what it looks like to sort of climb up that pyramid, right? So imagine for a second, if you have achieved the bottom level of the pyramid here, what I'm calling functionality, basic functionality, that means you've got reliable technology, you've got a functionally good user experience. It might not be super fancy necessarily, but like people can come to your site and find what they need, right? You have good security, you're not being hacked, you're not at risk of being hacked, and you are able to update content with some confidence that it's not going to break something or it's not going to make something else look weird on the site, right? So if you achieve that level of basic functionality, that's sort of the bottom level of the hierarchy of needs, right? When we get up to the second level, that's when we start focusing on productivity. Now we know a content update isn't going to break the site. Can we do it faster? Can we automate some things so it's not taking up all of our staff time? Can we start thinking about how we govern the site, who needs edit access and permissions and who doesn't? And can we streamline that workflow any in order to make it as easy as possible to keep the site fresh and up to date? So that's when we start saying, all right, we can trust the site not to break. So how do we start doing things with it in an easier, more straightforward, less time-wasting way? And then once you've gotten to that, that's when you can get your way up to the top of the impact pyramid, and you can start thinking about how you're actually driving audience engagement, how you're supporting your students and your faculty, how you're promoting the institution, doing those things that really make the website a true driver of value for your institution. So in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit about the concrete steps you can take to move your way up that pyramid. But before we go, I want to leave you with just another couple of pieces of advice. I certainly can say from my own experience working in higher ed that sometimes it can be a challenge to get your leadership and colleagues to invest in WebOps as something that's worthy of both time and financial resources. And there are a few different things you might think of doing if you have someone that you need to essentially convince of the value of this, right? One strategy that works really well is like think about who your gatekeepers are or even the naysayers. It might be your dean or director, or it might be a particularly influential faculty member, depending on where you are and what your structure is. But think about their needs. Almost always, the person who's your gatekeeper has some issue with the site, something that they wish was resolved, something that bugs them. If your solution can resolve that problem for them, then you've turned an obstacle into an ally, and you can go from having to sort of fuss and fight with them about whether this is worth it to someone who enthusiastically supports the value of what you're trying to do. Another thing is, take advantage of the fact that you work at an educational institution where evidence-based decision-making is very highly valued, right? There's a lot of numbers out there you're likely to be able to crunch about how much money or staff time you might be wasting right now dealing with a site that is only semi-functional or is only barely functional when you want it to be productive. and B, showing your colleagues in leadership how much time and money could be saved if you had a site that went from non-functional to functional, functional to productive, or if we're getting really aspirational, from productive to impactful, right? You should be able to actually have some concrete examples of what could be different, what could be better, if your site was functioning the way you need it to. And the last piece of advice is just to stay realistic, right? We all have a list as long as our arms of the things we would like to do differently with the site if we had unlimited money and time and resources. But think about the things that are the top priority, the most urgent. Focus on those first, right? The phased rollout is your friend. We definitely, you can bite off some chunks at a time. And John's going to talk a little bit more about what some of those initial chunks might be, depending on where you are in the process. But there are definitely ways to make this work for you wherever you are in your journey with your WebOps. So with that, I am going to change presenter here. So John, I will give screen share over to you. And there we are. Take it away. Oh, you're on mute though. Are we having some audio issues for John?
Testing.
There
Hello,
you are.
can you hear me?
We got you.
Right.
We got you.
I'm not sure what happened there. All right, switch my microphone up. All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Chaney, for running us through that. So important. And I love that first question about what do you wish your website could do? We're going to be talking about driving impact here, and that question is really important. As we look at these three levels of the pyramid and try to work our way up through them, it's important to actually start at the top of the pyramid. I know it seems a little counterintuitive, but our first step is to have an idea, have a vision of where we want to go. And we want to figure out what the primary goal of the website is. And the reason I love the question Chaney started us out with is because that often points to what that is. As you're thinking about like, what's the one thing I wish my website did? That's often the thing you need to reach your primary goal. So it's super important that you found what that is. As you're working on a website, maybe you work on quite a few, maybe you have a single website that you're really driving. But regardless, when you start work on a website, it's super important to know, why does this website exist? And so ask whoever is the primary stakeholder for this. And what you do not want to hear is, well, you just have to have a website, or, well, we already had one, so we're just keeping it. Those are not good reasons to have websites. And it can maybe be a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation sometime, but they're trusting you to make their website awesome. So make sure that they understand why this website exists, or that you understand why your website exists. Find out what that is. And that slide we saw earlier about the reasons you would have your website, maybe it's driving donations, maybe it's connecting students and faculty, raising awareness. But before you make changes to the website, it's really important to know what you intend to go for. Let that be your guiding North Star of the project going forward. So just think about this for a moment. We'll stop here and think about it. Having a little issue with the chat, so maybe you just write it down. But think about the current website you're on, or the last one you worked with, and ask yourself, what is or was the primary goal of that website? And then how did it move the mission of the university forward? So beyond just the scope that maybe you're in, how is this a larger part of the picture? Maybe you need to contemplate this. I like to sit down with a cup of tea and think about it, figure out that. But the importance here is that as we make choices along the way, it really helps if they're informed by this goal. It also helps us keep our morale up. We know what we're working towards as we do this. So great place to start. We're going to go jump back down to the bottom kind of rung of that Maslow's hierarchy, and we're going to start there. Chaney was talking about this, that functionality that's so important. But what I want to here expand that concept just a little bit and say that one of the reasons that functionality is so important is that it drives credibility. You want to make sure that your website is up and it builds the credibilities that you have. So just over 8 years ago, I started work at Washington University. And my first meeting outside of my department was about a crisis that had just occurred. 2 days before I had joined, they were testing their emergency alert system, and somebody had pushed the wrong button. They accidentally sent out a message that insinuated there was an active danger on campus. Many people were worried, of course, about what this could mean. And then this made national news. If you are working at a university, national news is usually good. This kind of national coverage is the worst kind of coverage you want. You don't want this. And part of why it made it to the news was that all of our sites had been running on the same monolithic server. And all of a sudden, when that traffic occurred, as people were getting this notification, there's an active danger, seek shelter, they all grabbed their phones, they all grabbed their laptops and went to find out what was happening. And all of that traffic to our emergency sites, to our flagship sites, brought everything down to a crashing halt. And now you're looking for information and you don't even know what's going on because the website is gone. And so there we were trying to put out the flames that were happening. We've got this coverage that we don't want, and we're trying to figure out what to do. No one had a way to get information. And for about a day, the rumors just spread rampantly. Thankfully, leadership got people together. We were able to find alternate ways to get the information out, and they were able to get things sorted out. Everyone ended up being safe. It ended up being okay. But my first meeting is 2 days after this event. I've just started, and our question to the question that Chaney had posed earlier was, how do we make sure this never happens again? We knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure we didn't have this disaster happen. And so the problem with that was we had lost a ton of credibility. We were the team that couldn't keep the website up when it was most important. Now, maybe you've had a similar event. If there's anything about the craziness of COVID, it has created new strain all throughout the website operations process. Everyone is going online to find the information they need, and this has caused lots of challenges to anyone running websites, especially in a higher education environment. And so when that site goes down, you're the face of it. It doesn't matter who's really at fault. When the chancellor calls and it's like, hey, there's an issue, you're trying to pass the blame, that doesn't cut it. You know, we could blame the IT, different infrastructure in our case, but at the end of the day, we were the face of the website, and it didn't matter why the website went down. All that mattered was that it went down. And so we had to try and work on restoring that credibility. And so I want to just give you some tips here to make sure you don't end up in that same place. And what we're going to be looking at here are some ways to identify if a site is a fragile website. So we're looking here at that bottom tier, that core functionality of your website. And there's a lot of things you can do, but I'm going to just call out some areas that can create a huge impact on the credibility of your team if you're not ready for these things. So one of those is version control. So can you make sure that you can roll back to a previous version if you mess something up? Really important. Now, maybe you're on a team, maybe you're not the developers on this. That's perfectly fine, but you're going to find a way to make sure that your team is implementing these if that's the role that you have. Make sure there's some backup process. Nothing worse than some kind of disaster and then losing everything that had been done. So make sure that's happening. You want to look for multiple environments. You want to make sure that the changes you make aren't going to break your live website because of some difference between maybe the developer's computer and the production website. And then security updates, so important. Most of my experience has been in the WordPress or Drupal worlds with a CMS, and they are incredibly powerful, incredibly useful, but it is important to stay on top of security updates, or all of a sudden you have these vulnerabilities that can cause lots of problems. If you inherit a website like this and you look and see that nobody's updated anything for years, that's the first thing you want to make sure that happens. Now, the next thing is, what are the table stakes you need to deploy with confidence? You've got this kind of core tooling in place. You're now safe from bad actors. You're safe and you're prepared if a disaster happens. Now you want to make sure you don't end up in an environment like I did. And so here we're talking about infrastructure. Now, there's lots of ways to do this, so I'm not going to try and prescribe a solution, but I'll pose this question to you. Do you have a performance target? You want to make sure you're setting some target, some goal, and testing against that so that you know that your website can handle whatever kind of traffic you're expecting to happen. After that crisis occurred, this was a huge thing that we on the web team had to solve. So we worked together, we set some benchmarks, we began to do load testing, and we built out a robust infrastructure so that we could then be confident that, hey, our website would stay up. When we made critical changes to those websites, we made sure that we reran those tests to make sure the stuff that we had done didn't break it. So you want to look for these performance targets. The benefit is, as you begin to fix these problems, as you begin to do this, you can rebuild that credibility. These changes were absolutely critical. In 2016, we had the university, of course, had the opportunity to host the 2016 presidential debates. And we were all like, oh, can we handle this? Well, we were able to say, when we were asked, we were able to say with confidence, yes, we can. We've already done the benchmarking. We know and have a process in place to handle this. So being prepared ahead of time can give you the credibility you need to succeed. And so that future successes restore the credibility for our team. And we were able to begin, impacting higher tier changes with that kind of with those improvements. Another thing I want to call out here as we talk about performance, this is just another big risk area, especially in higher education, is accessibility. Make sure that you have accessibility targets. Now, who knows where you're currently sitting? Maybe you're already tackling this. Awesome, thank you for being out there and leading the way. But if you're not, or that there are teams at your place that are not, this is super important to start working on. You don't have to solve it all in one day, but you need to pick where you want to go, pick one of the standards out there and begin working towards that. It's so important that you're doing this. One, because it's just the right thing to do. We want to make the web as accessible as possible to everyone out there. And then second, there's a huge financial incentive. You don't want to get sued because you didn't take this into consideration. So this is a great way to build the credibility of your web team. It's being on top of this and leading your university in the adoption of these processes. So that's a little bit about that functionality or credibility tier. Now we're going to start talking about productivity. So how does your team of marketers, designers, developers, content creators, stakeholders, I'm sure you may have a huge list of different people that get involved and with different titles, but how does everybody involved in the website collaborate together? It's an important piece of productivity. It's not a tech piece. It's a very human piece of how do you work together to make sure that people are listening and understanding each other. It's easy to think that you're collaborating, and I say this from personal experience. I was working along with a brilliant designer, and we were building a website for our anthropology department. And when we were done, me and the designer, we were very happy. It was a very beautiful website. I was super happy, to toot my own horn. I was very happy with how it had been built. Behind the scenes, I had all this wonderful code. I was using best practices. We give it to the anthropology department, and within a year, they stop using it. They go to an uglier website with less functionality and moved on. And the reason I tell this story is that I thought I was collaborating, but the problem was I was really only collaborating with my fellow designer. We were collaborating just within our team, but not with all the stakeholders. And so in the process of building out this website, we were focused on the things that matter to us as a designer, as a developer, and we missed the key stakeholders, the anthropology department's needs. They had a couple core needs that that required some ease of use that we weren't able, that we didn't really realize, we didn't listen well enough, and we missed those. And so we missed the mark. We built something we thought was great, but it ended up not solving the problem. And so they went with a less good, a poor solution, but it solved their problem, so it was better for them. So don't build something beautiful that ends up being useless. So yeah, don't follow my example. Be better than that. Listen to people. And so as we talk about that, it's just super important. Think about collaboration when you get into a project. And it really comes down to listening and valuing the input from stakeholders. It's not just your concerns. Make sure you're listening before you act on these things. Get everyone aligned so you're not building a website that nobody even needs. The second thing about in this kind of idea of collaboration is really around community. Try to find a community of people where you're at. If you don't have one, then begin to build this. I like this idea of what is to understand how good your community is, how healthy it is. What is the quantity and quality of your partnerships? You should be building partnerships across your university, partnerships with external groups. It's incredibly important, and it allows you to increase your productivity. And the reason for this is that as you build these relationships, you begin to get past the red tape that often slows things down. You begin to find ways to work faster and to work better together. And then the other piece here is as you figure that out, as you begin to work better together, and get this, the next area of productivity is around automation. Begin to find which tasks you're doing a lot and automate those. So think about your developers or anybody on the team, how much of their time is spent driving business value. What are some tasks they're doing that just are rote that could be taken care of? And then quality assurance testing is so important. How can you begin to automate that? This helps because you make sure errors aren't slipping through the cracks, but it also makes your whole team more productive as they can begin to rely on these things and spend less of their time on this mundane QA pieces and more time building the pieces that will drive impact for your organization. Which brings us over to impact. So now we've kind of wrapped all the way back to the beginning. If you remember, we started here at Impact and talking about what is the primary goal of our website. And that has kind of functioned as our North Star as we've gone through these things. So think about that and then make sure you're ready. Everyone is aligned on what the primary goal of the website is. And now the next piece of that, once you know that goal, is to begin to measure it. You want to measure how well you're doing. Otherwise, you may think you're getting closer to your goal when you're actually going the other way. And you could start with this at whatever tier you're at. Maybe if you don't have anything right now, just grab some Google Analytics, put it on your website, start to figure this out and track it. Maybe you've upgraded to Tag Manager. Maybe you've implemented an entire MarTech stack, in which case, awesome. But make sure one thing about this is once you reach this part, you're not done. You want to constantly be going back through these, be iterating over those, which leads us to our next piece, which is that you want to be iterating across all of this as you look to improve. Because each one of these that we've talked about, the credibility, the productivity, and the impact, you can continue to go deeper and deeper in those as you develop those. But it's a great way to look at your website and have a plan of how you want to tackle these. And iterating is so important. You want to make sure that you're including functionality, content upgrades. Don't get stuck in an endless cycle of like website redesigns. This can be really easy to get stuck in that. And then you never have a way to improve. You're just constantly scrambling to build the next website. But if you can move into this idea of iteration, you can begin to build off what you've done. And using that measurement that you've set up, you can now see, hey, this change improved how many people visit our sign up page, or we've improved the amount of people that click through to donate. And so you can get some actionable information that you can use. And the reason this is important, we come back to where Chaney was ending her talk on, is as you talk to those gatekeepers, as you talk to leadership, this level of impact is what's going to allow you to have a seat at the table. It's what it's going to allow you to talk to them and say, look, here's the impact I'm bringing. Can you give us the resources we need to do more? And never stop. You know, higher education, it's all about continual learning. You're never done. So keep iterating, keep learning on what you've done before and use that to constantly improve. So to sum this all up, we come back here to this kind of the pyramid that we were looking at and this hierarchy that we have. And so you want to start by understanding that primary goal of your website and letting that be your North Star. And now take whatever website you're working on and assess it based on this hierarchy. Start by making sure your website isn't fragile and acts of best practices and standards. Now remember, core functionality is critical in establishing the credibility you need to get these changes that are higher up the pyramid. And then you can begin to increase productivity. And you do this by cultivating deep partnerships, and you want to automate any of those error-prone or mundane tasks that you have. And then lastly, it's really important to demonstrate impact. And you'll want to iterate towards your goals and use the measurement to guide where you're focusing those efforts. So hopefully this will help you. You've got a rubric you can use that will help you kind of go in this direction. And that brings us here to our kind of wrap up. This is if you want to contact Chaney or I. Our information's here and available on the slide afterwards. And we would also love to take any questions you might have. Chaney, do you have anything you want to add here before I take us over to the QA screen?
No, I think you summed it up really well. We've had a lot of experiences in it with sort of a variety of different situations, right, over the years in higher ed, from garden variety day-to-day struggles with a poorly functioning website all the way to hair on fire crises. But some of the solutions proposed in here are remedies for all of that and more. And it can feel really overwhelming, but that's why, you know, John was talking about like setting priorities and picking the things that are most important to you and or your leadership and or your gatekeepers. And really, you know, just taking that first step, right? Seeing if you can assess where your most important needs are. You start there and you work your way towards continual growth and improvement. And eventually we'll get to the point where your site works for you and not the other way around.
Awesome. All right, I see we have a question that came through here. Thanks, John, for helping us out. So this question is from Elizabeth, and she says, we've got some tension, the tension we're navigating in WebOps as we work to ensure a fully accessible site. We found the need to limit access to content editors and instead run everything through our central review. A necessary compromise is the question here.
Told you it was going to be governance right off the bat. I can offer a couple of thoughts on that, and then I'll ask you to add to that, John. So Elizabeth, I think yes, a necessary compromise, but it may not be permanent, right? So especially if you're making changes in what your expectations are for your content editors, there certainly may be a period of time in which they need to learn what the new system is, whether it's a question of new content guidelines or they're dealing with different ways of inputting or making updates due to accessibility. So you might want to think about aspiring to a specific time period during which you need to do central review as your content editors learn the new rules, with the goal of eventually moving them towards independence once it becomes clear to you that they are capable of putting content up directly without requiring intervention from you. So it might be more palatable both for you and for them, and for everyone who doesn't love the extra layer of slowdown, to think of this as a temporary period. The other thing you might do is think about whether you can still have a representation of your different constituencies as content editors. So for example, if you're to use my experience at a research institution with multiple centers, perhaps rather than 3 to 5 people at each center who can edit content, it's one, and that person is trained and can move through the process. So there are a couple different structures that you can use to do that, but it doesn't have to be this way forever, depending on how difficult it is to add content to your site. John, anything to add there?
Yeah, I really like that. Especially that point of like, hey, it could be a temporary thing. Just something to add to this. One thing we had success with was really looking to try and empower people to understand the importance of accessibility. And so what we often found was a lot of these cases were people who just didn't know. And so I don't know if you have an accessibility users group, but that was something we developed at WashU and had a lot of success with. And what was surprising was we originally anticipated this to be a very like developer focused thing where we'd have, but instead it really became a place for content editors to come in and talk about, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. How can I do this better? And people got really excited about it. And I was amazed at how many people then became champions for accessibility who had just never thought of it. And so that education piece is huge. And so especially if you're looking to do this in a temporary compromise, find some ways to help educate, because a lot of people, once they realize the importance of it and the value, are like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll start adding alt tags to images. How do I do this? What are the resources I need? And that can be another way to help build relationships and also increase accessibility across your campus.
One other thing I'll add, and folks, please feel free to keep posting questions. I know we might be having a little technical trouble getting them in, but if we can see them, we'll answer them. But while we're getting those through, for those of you who may be wanting to think about a larger, longer term solution to this and related problems of governance, the project that we did to update our website at the Research Institute where I worked at Stanford, we also had a similar issue. We had an institute of about 400 people, if you include both faculty and staff. And at some point, I think we maxed out at about 80 content editors, which is very, very difficult to manage and to remain compliant with anything. Never mind accessibility. We were dealing with university brand compliance, best practices for image quality that was being put up on the site. You know, a lot of struggle for compliance and conformity, and essentially meeting sort of fundamental standards that we wanted to meet for the institution's web presence. And so this was a pretty fundamental component of our strategy when we were ready to do a redesign. And in our case, we moved towards a model using Drupal paragraphs, or essentially a component-based design system that essentially gave our constituents, our stakeholders, the opportunity to mix and match component blocks to their heart's content on their own pages. But those design components, those blocks, were pre-designed by us to be both fully brand compliant, as accessibility compliant as we could make them, in terms of color and placement on the page, and requiring meta tags to be used, all that sort of thing. So essentially what we put into place were some technical and structural guardrails that gave our users no choice but to remain compliant along some of those areas, while still offering them as much freedom as they were looking for to determine the arrangement of text, video, content blocks, long and short, carousel, image carousels, all of that sort of thing. And so we were able to kind of meet a couple of somewhat contradictory goals by instituting a system for the site that enabled us to have some fundamental control over some of those issues. So that of course is a much larger, longer term solution, but one worth considering if you're at the point in your institution where you're looking at a replatform or an upgrade. Maybe you're still on Drupal 7, you got to get off that before too long. There are a lot of opportunities to take that kind of thing into account when you're developing a new site. So governance, like the tool set that you select can impact governance in a way that's helpful to you if you think about that when you're making your technical decisions.
Yeah, great call out. And I'll call one more thing around the WebOps key of automate that we were talking about a little bit earlier. This is one of those things that, like, trying to police this or the governance needed in place can be pretty mundane. And it's like, how do we automate this? I'll throw a tool out there. I'm not associated with them at all, but we use Site Improve. I know there's other people that have other places to do other tools, but there are systems out there that you can automate to scan websites and get reports of, hey, how are we doing on accessibility? And we were able to automate these reports and then send them to users. And so instead of us needing to constantly be out there looking and find this, we automated some of this and said, hey, here's the report for your site. This week, we noticed X amount of things that came through, but beware of it, because it would also find things that me or others had coded improperly for accessibility reasons. And so, I mean, it was a good thing, but we suddenly, if you're sending a report to someone that says, hey, here's some accessibility struggles, and they're like, what about this? I can't fix it. You need to do that. It makes you move pretty quick. So yeah, so there's one area that you can look to help in this too.
Automation can be scary in a variety of aspects. I use marketing automation a great deal during my years in higher ed, and it certainly can be sort of a nerve-wracking experience the first time you're like, okay, I'm going to let this system communicate directly with my students for me, and I'm not going to touch it. It certainly can be unnerving, but it also ended up saving me about 3 months a year of work when we were, when I was at Berkeley, working at the LLM program there. We had a lot of complex communications needs for our admitted students before they arrived. And we managed to put together some automated drips that were, again, sort of took into account some information that the students had sent us in their applications. So we were able to kind of personalize the communication for them. So yeah, automation is it's a double-edged sword, but when done correctly and with forethought, it can save your team so much time. And it really enabled us in our case to focus on driving more of that impact for our program rather than spending all of our time just trying to compose and send emails to the right group of students in a particular situation. All right, do we have other questions for anybody who wants to put them either in the questions tab if it's there or in the chat?
And just to bring one thing up, in case people are having a hard time with the chat, speaking of iterating, John, I spent some time iterating here, and I sent everyone a private message through the chat. A big thanks to Alex on our EDU web team, who helped me realize that will like open a chat functionality for people. So if you, for those of you watching, if you stepped away or doing something else, if you look at that right control panel at the bottom, you should have a chat for me that you can respond to with a question if you'd like to ask anything here in the closing minutes. We're in the final countdown here.
Now I'm going to have final countdown stuck in my head.
And I'll go ahead and just jump back to this. If you want to jump on Twitter and tweet it, Chaney or I, or follow up on LinkedIn with your question, we would be happy to help answer anything that you have.
Other than that, I'd say we can probably call it a day.
I think you two were so comprehensive. You answered everyone's questions here. So thanks to you both. Really, John and Chaney, a great presentation, so helpful and useful, and love that point of impact being the top of that pyramid. That's been a really interesting, I think, evolution lately within communications and marketing and higher ed especially. There's just been so many years when we get caught up in all of these minute details, but a huge focus in this webinar series, whether it's been social media or WebOps or whatever we're doing, is really looking at that impact that we're making at the end of the day. So a huge thanks that you've focused in on that and gave us so much more today. So a big thanks to both of you, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll wrap it up here, and thanks again to you all.
Thanks everyone. Great to be here. Bye-bye.